Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in with us today and for joining us for a round table discussion where we hope we bring you lots of knowledge and insights. Today, we're going to be diving into how we secure the future of creative production. And it's a joy to have with me representatives from Nedgraphics and also 10 Duke. Frank Mader is the CEO, President's the right title?
It's president officially, but CEO is the same thing. I just lead the team.
Leads the team over there at Nedgraphics. And in the room today, we have Neil Fenton, a newcomer to our Roundtable series. Neil is the CEO of a company called 10 Duke, which is a London-based technology company specialising in licensing with a hefty balance of customers totaling, I think you said, over £4 billion worth of licensing across a variety of verticals. Verticals that span mining, CAD/CAM sectors, all sorts of things, including like special effects software and all sorts of things. So licensing, obviously, a huge part of the future of how we buy and subscribe and protect the services that we all use in our daily lives, really. Most definitely. So today's discussion is, as I said, about securing the future. And this roundtable is we're going to look at the evolution of creative production as a community and that shift from legacy hardware to seamless cloud-based software access, which we all completely take for granted, but at the end of the day has to be very secure. Now, as remote working changes, global networks are redefining how we create, and we have to really think now about how we secure and utilize our vital design tools. So Nedgraphics and 10 Duke started looking into all of this and working together some time ago to bring a plan to action. So today we're going to explore how they started working together to evolve beyond and to address those pitfalls of outdated licensing solutions, really, to really future-proof the environment, the creative environment for all of your users over there at Nedgraphics. So, Frank, let's move to that first question. What prompted Nedgraphics to look for 10 Duke?
Yes, thank you, Debbie. Always a pleasure to be here. So yes, that's the main question. So it goes back a little bit. I think we'll go into the discussion around the specifics of why, but just in terms of the context. So I came into the business, Nedgraphics, just under 4 years ago, and identified licensing, funnily enough, as probably the single biggest problem that we had. We had lots of other ones, but this one as a single thing was the biggest one. Why? Because it affects every single customer that we have, and that's many. And it also affects a lot of our people internally. So without going too much into the detail, we had a fairly painful license renewal process that was again affecting a lot of customers with downtime, and it was taking up a lot of resources on our side. So having identified this as a real issue to solve as a priority, we started looking at the options. And not surprisingly, and I think a lot of companies like us, like Nedgraphics with a long past, would have come from a time when you would do everything yourself. Right, so we would, do the CAD software, which is what we do, obviously, but we had to deal with a lot of things that were definitely not our expertise, and licensing is one of those. So, in terms of the mindset, what I wanted to do with Nedgraphics when I came in was to try and move away from that mindset of trying to recreate everything or reinvent the wheel multiple times, and instead try and work with best-in-class partners where we could identify them to really solve those problems. And that's basically how we came across 10 Duke. So again, we'll go into the details of why it's such a good match, but really the concept was it's becoming more complicated. We've got lots of different requirements, and again, we'll go into some of those in the conversation. And now we need to work with, or we need to identify a partner that's really going to help us with solving that problem so that we can focus on what we do best, which is really the the design software, right? We don't
Yeah.
claim to be experts in other things, and licensing, as I said, with security is becoming more and more complex. So let's not try to reinvent the wheel. Let's just identify someone who can really help us with this.
I think as an industry we are looking more and more to outsource those specialist skills, aren't we? And to bring them into our ecosystem.
Well, that's it, because you have, and we've had this discussion before in other with other items, Debbie. But it's everything is becoming more complicated. It's more global. You have bigger problems to solve. So
Yeah.
again, I think it's obvious that no one should try and solve everything by themselves, right? So we have now technology from different vendors. We host things in the cloud, for example, etc. So that's just the natural way it is going, and for us again to focus on where we add the value is really good. That we recognize that we should not get involved in absolutely everything.
Yeah.
So that was really the reason.
And I guess for Neil, the challenges that Frank was having were just the same operational issues that lots of your customers have already had.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think for most software vendors, it comes back to the usual challenges of, do you build it or do you buy it? And in such a core piece of functionality that, like licensing, obviously we would argue that it's better to outsource it, particularly as technologies improve and the focus of a president like Frank. There's only so many things that you can do with the engineering resources you have, and if you are in a design vertical, those are the people that you've hired. That's really where you ideally want your resource. Are they talented engineers? Could you ask them to do other things? Sure. Will they do it? For sure. But is that what you want them to be doing? So, for example, does it make sense to go off and build your own CRM system? Probably not. You would probably go to Salesforce or HubSpot or one of the other common ones. And we would, in licensing, it's exactly the same thing. And particularly as people are looking to improve how they license, then ideally, they'll come to a company like us, and we do our best to serve them. And in fact, like the in-house licensing engine is our biggest competitor in the market. So it's a very common approach to take. But then when you have executives like Frank who kind of go, wait, should I be doing this? Then they can leverage all of the expertise that we've gathered under our company, who just are licensing pros. They just worry about all the issues that most software vendors won't even be aware of. And it just means that they can move faster in their own industry.
They move faster, but they stay future safe as well, don't they? Because this is your area. You're always at the leading end of the technology.
Yeah, ideally, that's where we're trying to be. And again, it's about applying brains to problems. And in our case, we're applying those brains to the challenges of licensing. And in Frank's case, then he's applying his resource to the challenges of design and giving his customers the best design software possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about where the industry has, and for a lot of different companies still is actually. Let's talk about the legacy problem. Retiring the dongle for lots of people. That I remember many years ago, that dongle was the prized possession in the back of the back of the computer, and woe betide anybody that moved it, because if it had gone, that was it. Zero was going to happen that day. So, Frank, let's talk about that if you don't mind. How static license keys and that kind of the rigid on-premise servers, that little thing in the back of the CAD machine, is over, and why these methods, they once did protect intellectual property when everyone was static and worked from one device, but we have to move forward. Why do you think design and production has clung to hardware dongles, like literally a physical piece of hardware, for so long, despite obvious logistical nightmares?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think it's some of it is practical, and some of it is purely is purely legacy, and essentially people being comfortable. So Nedgraphics, we talked about it in the past. It's been in business for over 40 years. And there used to be a time, and it's not even that long ago, really, where people used to work in a place of work, right? Some office or factory or something, had the PC tower under the desk. They would go to work, do their work, and then go back home. So that was very common. And essentially, the way that we built our software, including the security, was based around this concept. And so I think everything started to change probably some years ago, but really, just like many things, it was COVID that mostly exposed the limitations of this practice, right? Because all
Yeah.
of a sudden, from one day to the next, literally, people had to go and work from home. So what they did in our case is they literally just grabbed the dongle, the physical thing, and started using it home in a laptop or whatever. And that was the beginning, I suppose, of really accelerating that change, because that change was already happening, right? I think
Yeah.
the fact that some people, particularly in design, if you think of freelancers, right, they would be moving around, so that's not new. But it was suddenly accelerated, just again, like a lot of things during COVID. So I think that's where we've come from. Now, the other thing with the dongle, because I do sort of keep asking myself, it's interesting because in some environments where I think in production in particular, where it's going to sound weird, but bear with me, where people have got this mindset of buying equipment, right? So they will buy a machine, they will buy a manufacturing machine, and for them, buying the software, the only thing that they had was really this. So for them, it was the physical representation of that investment, right? Okay, I'm buying the software. This is the software, and of course, it's not, right. It never was. This was just an accessory. But I think it's kind of come to represent this, and some people still in those kind of very production centric environments have almost like an issue, like visualizing the fact that they're buying something where there is nothing physical. So I think that also kind of played in there, but I think we're kind of over that now. But I think it does explain why it took such a long time for this to become a real problem. But again, it was, I think, COVID as the sort of catalyst to expose this and try and get everyone to move to something else, right? Because again, the system was just not really fit for purpose.
It must have caused huge issues during COVID,
Oh,
mustn't
yeah.
it? Yeah,
Oh,
huge
yeah.
issues.
No, and we had, and again, keeping in mind, as I said, the problem that we had was not, and this is slightly too much detail, but moving the dongle from one machine to another is usually not enough, right? Because we actually had to make sure that the license itself was also kind of somehow moved. And that's what I mean with this sort of burden. So it was basically meaning that it was taking time from us to accommodate for this. And of course, it also had downtime in terms of the customers. So again, COVID was the catalyst, but this need was always there. So now we decided, okay, let's just fix this and really just, and this is where we started the conversation, to future-proof this solution. We need to be able to accommodate all of those various use cases. And that's really all of them, right? From those roaming people working from different places. We still have a need for those people working in a factory somewhere on the PC. We've got many different requirements.
Yes.
And back to my very first point, the beauty of it is we don't really need to think about this, because the Neil and the team at Tenduke would have thought about all of this. So every time we came with a new requirement, we would have a way to accommodate it, right?
Yeah.
So whether it was that roaming scenario or the fixed workstation, whatever it was, the beauty of it, again, as we keep saying, is we don't need to do that thinking. Someone has already done that. So that's the whole point.
You must have seen, Neil, as well with your existing customers. I mean, it doesn't have to be in design here. In any of those vertical markets that you spoke about, they must have really had an uptick there during the COVID, because they already had the agility to control and migrate their systems there. Their employees would already have that agility to be working from any location during the pandemic.
I mean, it depends across verticals. You have your
Yeah.
more traditional industries, and you have your more advanced. I think a lot of it, in truth, what we see is it comes down to the executive team, and what kind of people are on the executive team, and what kind of business are they trying to build. And I
Yes.
think the other aspect of going back to the question about kind of what has spurred that transition. There's two other factors that I would kind of throw into the mix. One is that executive team and people wanting to be future proof, people wanting to have their product on the leading edge of capability, so that they can delight their own customers in terms of in terms of how the customer accesses their software. Fundamentally, licensing is a pain for everybody, right? And what we're trying to do is try to take that pain away, because in Frank's case, what the Ned team is trying to do is trying to get their design software into the hands of the end user as easily as possible.
Yeah,
Ideally,
exactly.
there's no friction, and our
Instantly.
job is to minimize that friction as much as possible. So when you have a forward-thinking executive team who's trying to grow the business, reduce friction for customers, that's where we see a big transition. And then it's also kind of user expectation. So if you take one of the young design people in London or in New York who are working for one of Frank's customers who are, in their 20s, and their expectation as to how they are supposed to access a piece of software it hasn't changed actually. They have
Hasn't
grown
changed for
up.
them. They've
For
grown
them,
up with it. Yeah.
they just like in your personal life, if you log into your Netflix account, you log into Spotify, it should just work. It should just be easy. And so what that expectation has done is shifted to B2B. So why shouldn't it be the same for in my professional life when I'm accessing a piece of B2B software? And the answer is there shouldn't be any difference. As long as it's secure, as long as it's easy, that's what software vendors should be trying to achieve. And so when you get that mix, then you end up with customers, vendors as we would call them, moving their product line forward by implementing kind of best in practice licensing.
Yeah. I guess we've all had this in our lives with the phones as well, haven't we? Do you remember you would order a new phone and you'd have to wait for your SIM to arrive, and then you'd have to take it out that ridiculous little card and then try and get it in the phone. They're all electronic SIMs these days. Your phone, everything's active. You switch continents. It's an electronic SIM, isn't it now? So we're seeing this.
But when exactly. As you take a vendor like Ned with such a long history, all of the challenges that company then has to keep itself leading edge are quite substantial, because we've had such a massive, Net existed pre-internet, right? So then you've got to deal with the internet. Then you've got to deal with, so much more of the workload going online, a lot of connected services being online. There's a lot to do in addition to keeping your product best in class. And so that's where you find that nice combination where somebody will say, well, hey, I'm going to focus my resources on this, and then I'm going to outsource and work with partners on these other aspects.
Yeah. Neil, you are the security expert. Let's take a nice segue into the next question then, because some people may worry about security with it not being physical, and yet I would assume it's much more secure. Let's dive into this then from a security standpoint. How does tying a software license directly to a user's identity mitigate and stop the risks associated with shared dongles and static keys, which can move around all on their own?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing. So there's a vendor that we worked with, and we still work with a long time ago. And the way that this person explained it, which was actually a very good way of doing it, it was like, when I issue, and the way he phrased it was, when I issue a key to a customer, it's like I walk up to a very tall brick wall. I throw the key over that brick wall, and I have absolutely no idea who catches it on the other side. I might get paid for it, but I don't know who then is using it. And so from a security perspective, you don't necessarily know whether the person who's purchased it is then subsequently using it. And I would argue, that's a very key and important fact. But the other big thing is, if you're the software vendor and you don't know who's using your software, you're missing a trick, because you cannot then provide a product or a service to them that is customized for them. So particularly in the case of a vendor that has more than one product, you don't have the opportunity to easily introduce your second product or your third product or your new feature to that user as easily as you would do if you have a kind of what we would argue state-of-the-art identity-based licensing system. You're much more restricted. So the whole concept of product-led growth disappears for you. You're entirely focused on sales-led growth. And so knowing who the end user is just creates so many different opportunities for you as a software vendor to better connect with those customers. And also in B2B, remember that your customer is probably the organization to which you sell your software licenses, but your real customer is that end user who loves your software, who they don't pay for it.
Yeah, loves the big word there. Yeah.
So you've got to have connection, I would argue, to that end user of your software, because then you know what they're doing, you know which features they're using, and you can then suggest new features to them, not only to make more money from them, but just make sure that they're enjoying your product. And if it isn't, you then gives you the chance to make some amendments to it.
But that customer satisfaction is imperative to every company's success, isn't it?
For sure, yeah.
As it lands with the person moving around the desk.
Yeah. And the problem is with a key, you give them a key, you don't know who's using it. And the only time you really get feedback is renewal time, when they come and say, we're not going to renew, or we're not going to renew for as many seats. You don't have any interaction point during that time. Whereas if you have something like Nedkey, like Frank has, you can then go and say, well, how often did that person log in? How often are they using the application? Which features are they using? Have they tried that new feature we launched last week or not? If they're not, why are they not using it? You just have a lot more information on which you can then take decisions.
But I think it's important to note here that it's not surveillance, it's actually improving the experience for the user here as well, Frank, isn't it?
Yeah, and to take some, like concrete examples here. So, as you know, Debbie, I also lead Optitex, which is different kind of software focused on digital pattern making, but sometimes we have an overlap with customers. We have in fashion in particular, we have some common customers. So that's exactly why we merged. And so we want to take advantage of those opportunities going forward. And that's a great example of exactly what Neil was describing, where without this sort of visibility, and I can't even think about how we would have physically done it, right?
How did it ever work before? The same
customer work with the two different, legacy software packages on the same machine, for example. So these are the types of things that, back to the point about growth and so on, that I want to focus on is what is that bigger opportunity? What does that look like? And how do we use this technology to take advantage? So that's the kind of the opportunity side. The other thing I would also say, and that's, Neil will be very familiar with this, but we also have more and more scrutiny in terms of security from our own customers, right? When we sell into large brands or these, large suppliers in the Far East or whatever, they are becoming more sophisticated. The IT environment is becoming more sophisticated. So they really demand from us some security, redundancy, etc., etc. So that's the sort of the more reactive side, is that the expectation or the requirements are different now, and we have to be able to prove that we can provide that continuity, right? So as an example, if the building burns down and the dongle at the same time, then what happens, right? Everyone is down. So I think, if your building burns down, maybe you have bigger problems than continuity of design, but still it means that the business stops. So we have to be able to also answer these challenges, and with the same technology, essentially, we can also do this, right? We can guarantee that business continuity. And on our side, back to the earlier point, we can also get more visibility and then offer the better services, etc.
Yes. It's all about the customer's experience, isn't it? Whether it's the CEO or the end user that's actually pushing push on the keyboard. Yeah, definitely. Let's dive into that then. Let's talk about user-centric licensing and how it empowers the creative. The future is literally about that engagement, and it's not about restricting people. It's about everyone being as agile and efficient in their working practices and the working hours that they do as well. You've got teams moving across the world, across different time zones. Quite often, a designer will have to work late in the evenings because she's doing something with India or Bangladesh or wherever. So we have to have this flexibility in our lives, and I think we expect it, actually, don't we? Now, I don't think.
Sure.
Yeah. Whenever we, you talked about a brick wall before, Neil. Wherever we come up against a brick wall, we don't have the concentration span for it, do we? We just need that fluidity throughout all of our systems and all of our software that we use across our devices. So, Frank, how do you think then that user-centric approach fundamentally changes the day-to-day workflow of a global design team?
Yeah, so I mean, this is literally the what we said before, and what Neil was talking about with this friction or lack of friction. So when we went around looking at possible solutions for this, I think the very first use case that we had in mind, then we had many other things that we could solve without, kind of thinking about it. But the very first use case, or the one that was absolutely critical, was literally that roaming designer, right? So that was a COVID accelerated practice, but in our world is very common. So how do you make sure that designer in New York can go from the office to home to working with suppliers in the Far East completely seamlessly? And again, it sounds quite simple, but it's not. And in this case now, because we have users logging in with their account, essentially, then we can do this and completely reduce that friction. So I think it's exactly this. It's they need to focus on, our end users want to focus on doing their job, and they don't want anything getting in the way. And that's exactly what we provide. So it's almost like if licensing was to disappear completely, that's exactly the experience that we want, right? We don't want people to think about it, and that's about reducing that friction.
Yeah, just taking the friction out of it completely. Yeah, definitely. Okay, global integrations. Maybe we can dive in here as well and dive a little bit deeper into those seamless workflows. To create that global network requires more than just access to software, doesn't it? It really needs that interconnection so that data is flowing in all directions as well, backwards and forwards. Maybe both of you could really just help me here to understand how those cloud-based integrations give production companies a competitive advantage in a very fast-paced market. This isn't just about functionality, is it? It's about efficiency, profitability, revenue. It's about making your staff capable of doing what they need to do when they want to do it, and using their time much more efficiently.
Yeah, so maybe I can start on this one, because this is, again, back to those, like in the early days when I first started, this became very clear to me very quickly, is that one of the great things that we do have going for us, and a big opportunity, is the fact that we do have these customers everywhere in the world. So we have brands, retailers, very often in the West, in North America, in Western Europe, and then we have their suppliers working often in the Far East. So our opportunity really in a very fragmented, still very analog kind of supply chain is to try and solve those problems. And that's how we got to not just doing the licensing in the cloud, but doing more and more in the cloud. Is not because the cloud is the sort of the goal, is because it's a means to an end. That is how we can facilitate these exchanges, right, and this collaboration. So that was very clear to me again that in terms of licensing, that cloud-based approach was an absolute given. Again, not because it's a cool thing to talk about, but simply because that is the only way that you can enable those types of opportunities across the world. So again, for us was a complete obvious requirement, and that is also, by the way, how we will take advantage of those common opportunities. I was talking about Optitex and Nedgraphics. More and more, we want to talk about that end-to-end workflow. So that's another example that basically requires this type of infrastructure, and the licensing is one of them, but it is again a means to an end. So anything cloud is really a lot of focus for us going forward, and I would imagine, Neil, going to you, that it's not unique to our vertical, right?
Exactly right. So I think that across a whole bunch of different verticals, what we're seeing is we'll have more traditional vendors who have perhaps been in the market for a longer period of time, who are selling, say, desktop applications. What we're increasingly seeing is that they are then extending that product set to include other aspects to the product, complementary aspects that are run perhaps from the cloud. But then the way in which the end user accesses either type of software should still be the same. It should be still very, very simple from the perspective of the end user. And so, a user-centric approach. It doesn't apply to all use cases, and you can certainly, there are certain cases where a key may make more sense. But by and large, where you have a human interaction with a piece of software, that it would make sense to centralize. And that's the benefit of cloud services, particularly as you have companies like Ned that are serving a global customer base. Cloud just creates opportunity so that you can then, whether it's outsourcing a licensing engine to a company like us, or outsourcing CRM, It just means that you can better serve your customers wherever they may be by relying on the correct partner who can then, deliver for you at the same time too. And by all means, vendors should be asking hard questions of vendors like us. What happens if something goes wrong? If you're a cloud service, how resilient is it? What kind of guarantees can you give me? For sure, those are 100% questions that should be asked. And it's our responsibility as vendors to be able to deliver to executive teams like Frank's. But it does create, such great opportunities. Like I'm unlikely to go build my own data center. Like it just
Very unlikely.
In certain cases it may make sense, but for fast growing businesses who want to get things done, they are most likely going to outsource, depending on the case, but most likely to something like AWS or GCP or Azure. And there are obviously other cloud providers. But nowadays it's so easy to integrate to them and get going. It does require some knowledge, but it means that you can then create a broader service offering, in case of design software, around that design software to further kind of enhance your business as a whole. That it's definitely the way it's going to go. And I mean, it has gone. You just look at the size of AWS, but also now increasingly with AI, then it's going to it's the norm for sure. Just because again, we're going into this phase, or we're in a phase now where we are leaping ahead. I'm Internet 1.0, right? And that was novel, right? And now it's again vastly accelerated in terms of the development and the tools that we have available to us. And so forward-thinking businesses will think about how, they best utilize those tools. And it's going to mean outsourcing. I'm not going to go, we most likely will not build our own LLM. We might, but we certainly can take advantage of the hard work that other companies are doing that helps us accelerate our own business. And that's the pattern that's going to continue for sure.
I think that's such a really essential part of this story as well, isn't it, Frank, as well? Because, choosing to work with Neil Fenton and the team over at Nedgraphics isn't just a piece of software. It isn't just a service. It's a whole ecosystem, a very specialist ecosystem that exists that the industry has to move into, but it needs all of your expertise. So choosing the right partner who has that deep knowledge that has that transparency and that transfer of knowledge to you, Frank, as well as a CEO, is super, super important, because you've got to be choosing, Neil, haven't you, the right infrastructure, the right data servers, the information has to be moving to the right places with the right security, again, in order to make sure that if there is an outage, things are porting and they're moving around and the systems don't go down. That's all your speciality, Neil, isn't it? In the background of things that we would never even question. It just suddenly goes off. But you guys pick it up and make it work again because of the information and the knowledge you already have and the systems you've already set up in the background.
No, exactly right. And so there's a whole host of questions that we will have thought about because we've experienced them in the past, or we've experienced them together with customers. And so when Frank comes to us and says, well, what happens if AWS goes down in Virginia? Well, statistically, it's we should have the answers. Frank shouldn't have to worry about those answers. Yeah, exactly. That's our responsibility. And then we represent that responsibility to him through an API uptime guarantee, which is obviously very common. It's not unique to us, but that's what then contractually Frank would and Nedgraphics will have a guarantee of, because again, it's less for him and his team to worry about. He can worry about his own service obligations towards his own customers. If you try to do all of that yourself, boy, that's going to be a lot of work and it's going to throttle your growth. So if you're a fast growing software vendor like Ned, like Optex, you are looking for the quickest route to efficiency. And then in that case, outsource your licensing, outsource your CRM, but pick your partners carefully who can show you a proven track record, show you the experience, and help you think through those issues that you haven't even realized you're going to have.
Yes, what you don't know.
No, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Frank, carry on.
Sorry, just jumping in here. The other thing that's interesting, as we sort of mentioned it, but just to kind of reiterate this, we have desktop software. We still have it right now. It's still very important. We still continue doing this, but now we have more and more other things, right? We have cloud-based modules. We have AI, etc., etc. So the solution is becoming this sort of hybrid of stuff that sits on the desktop, stuff that sits in the cloud, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and of course that makes sense because that is the solution that we need to deliver to our customers. But then it becomes quite complicated to manage all of this, and that's exactly where we can again go to Neil and the team and basically say, okay, we have all of these requirements. We don't need to really worry about how it's going to be solved, but we need a solution for it. And so we can have those discussions to say, okay, like how do we do this, and how do we make sure that the same user, back to the friction, has that seamless experience regardless of what they're using and where they are. And that's exactly where this stuff just becomes so helpful.
And all of it improving the customer's experience at every single pixel.
Always.
Literally.
Yeah.
Every
Pixel
single
by
pixel.
pixel.
Pixel by pixel. Yeah.
Yeah, but the challenge is too, there's different use cases. So if you take Frank's case of Ned and Optitex, you have this amazing design software used by 20-somethings who are, doing this incredible work in London or in New York or what have you. But then you also have software that's being used in production facilities in remote India. Well, the use case there is completely different from the use case of the designer in New York. And so what you need to be able to do is solve those use cases. And then part of the benefit that we bring to the table is the fact that we probably will have seen them before and will have an answer to the questions that will come from Frank's team. We don't necessarily know their specific use cases. That's what they bring. And then we can collaborate with them to say, well, this is the way you could do it. And then they check and make sure that that's going to work for their end customer. And then you're off and running. Yeah. But there's so much, there's so many amazing use cases out there. Like there's a mining vendor that we work with where they sell cloud-based software, but then their engineers who use it go down into a mine for several days with no internet connection. So how do you support that? Well, we have an answer. But unless you've kind of had that experience, then it's going to be something that the vendor themselves will struggle with if they're building their own solution. So you just, by outsourcing, you get all of that experience brought to the table. And then it's just kind of connecting the dots in terms of what solution fits best to which use case.
Yeah, super important, isn't it? That online, offline conversation.
Yeah, yeah, always.
Down a mine for 7 days with no internet. That can't be something that people strive to do.
There's lots of people that do it.
You will never get a creative to go anywhere for 7 days without the internet. It's not going to happen.
No.
Oh, it's great. Moving on to our last topic actually for discussion today was sustainability. And that's probably something that people don't really put the two together, do they? You probably wouldn't put security and access with sustainability. But, ethical practices and sustainability are just as important as profitability are to all businesses. So I'd like to talk about that next step toward reducing the industry's carbon footprint. Either of you, please take this question. How significant is the environmental impact of retiring physical software dongles on a global scale? We're not just, we're talking about design here, but as Neil just said, it's going to be quite huge, I would think.
Yeah, so maybe I can just start with this one simply because our customers, as you know, Debbie, care a lot about sustainability, right? This is a big topic in the industry. It comes up all the time.
It's the responsibility of our industry, isn't it?
Exactly, and it's they usually have KPIs for things like that. So I don't know that a dongle is going to change this very much. But the point is, it's very much top of mind for most of our customers. And so from a global scale point of view, I would imagine it's quite significant. And it's not just the plasticky bits, obviously, but you need to manufacture these things. And more importantly, you need to ship them around, right? We would have to literally send these things all around the world, replace them every now and again, and so on. So I've not done the maths, but if you were to multiply this by the number of users in every single industry where this used to happen, it's probably significant in terms of the waste. The physical waste, but also, again, all of that transportation. So it is definitely, it doesn't come up as this single thing, right? I think our customers have got larger problems when it comes to sustainability, but it certainly helps to be able to have that discussion, because the way that we can help them with their sustainability goals is to generally have a positive impact on their waste. And that is one of the aspects. Right, so we try and digitize things, we try and move away from them shipping samples back and forth. And this is very much the same thing. It's mostly around the sort of physical transportation.
Yeah, but also the production side of it, the performance, and the fact that you're always online, everything's working. So productivity is the word I'm looking for. I would guess that from that point of view, moving to cloud-based syndication, is that the right word? Cloud-based licensing really surely must have massive upside for sustainability, up from a profitability side of things. Neil, across different verticals, you must have perhaps seen people actually saving real carbon here.
No, for sure. I think,
Yeah.
Frank's point, I think there is the physical cost, but
Yeah.
there's an example of a vendor that we work with in Southeast Asia, who before coming to us, they were basically annually shipping about 300,000 physical dongles.
Wow.
And so you have the physical dongle.
Yeah.
Plus, then more importantly, I think from an environmental impact point of view, you have the actual shipping process and the petrochemicals being used in transporting that, whether it be on a plane or on a train or on a van, to the actual end customer. And I think, I can't remember exactly what the number was, but it was like, it cost them $5 to send it. And so that was a fairly hefty chunk of money that they then could walk away from, because the marginal cost of sending a digital license token is like, nothing. So you have that cost that you save, but then us, more broadly, as business operators, of course, although the number of dongles in the world, it'd be actually interesting to try to find out and see how many people are still doing that. You save on that shipping cost, but more importantly, I think is the approach that all businesses need to be taking to be, wherever possible, minimizing their environmental impact. So in our case, our biggest environmental impact is the cost of CPU cycles. And so what we do is we hire good engineers who then write, code that runs efficiently, and we try to minimize the number of cycles we're going to burn, and we try to minimize, potential travel and tools like this.
So for our listeners, I think what you're describing is the amount of data that's going backwards and forwards every time something's triggered. So you're using
the data, but it's more about the processing of that data.
Yeah, but
so
that's
doing that efficiently, which means
that CPU is using the energy. So you reduce,
so you're using less energy.
Yeah, by correct coding, you're using less energy.
Yeah, and then also what's happening is we then ask our infrastructure providers, which in our case we use Amazon, what are they doing to make sure that they are running as efficiently as possible? And then they come back to you and say, well, we are building data centers in Northern Europe where it's cold. So then we don't have to cool the buildings as much. And so everybody in this chain needs to be doing as much as they can to minimize that impact, so that we then, I think, I have kids, and we want to make sure that when they're adults and we're, on our way out, that everything is as good as it could have been, because we all have to take action. And so in our scope of licensing, those are the things that we can encourage our members of the team to be doing, but also we enable through, get rid of dongles, and there's a whole host of benefits you get as a result of that, some of which are environmental.
And from the environmental side, then you must have a great insight into kind of local service, as you said, and that green powered data centers that are minimizing energy consumption, which again is something Frank wouldn't ever want to think about when he was trying to work out software licenses.
Yeah, not necessarily.
But the infrastructure you choose as the specialist is super important to the overall sustainable and environmental benefits that can be. It seems like a really tiny thing, just this little tiny piece, but that tiny piece of plastic that used to go in the back of the computer is now plugged into a mainframe that can be controlled sustainably and environmentally by using the right specialists.
Having the environmental prism to look through obviously is much more important, and it's incumbent on all of us to have answers to the questions. Should a customer come and ask you? But that's actually, it's a question you should be asking yourself, right? As an executive, what am I doing to minimize the impact for the business? And so, yes, we ask questions of our infrastructure provider, and then where possible, we choose the most environmentally sustainable options of the options they present to us. And because we're in a competitive market, there are other infrastructure providers available. And so what they do is they keep each other in check by improving their services. And hopefully, over time, what will happen is that'll get more and more efficient. and the impact of doing, of digital services will become less. There's obviously a big question now about the impact of AI, but that is something that's so new. That is something that there will be other brains elsewhere working on that issue, because of course those teams will also want to minimize the environmental impact there, no doubt.
That's great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we've uncovered so much here, haven't we? It's
Yeah,
you know,
it was a pleasure.
It really is. It's great. It really makes all of us rethink about all of the tools that we access in a physical format, but how we access them online, and we ensure that our workflows are as innovative as the products we design and create. And I think for the next generation, that seamless fluidity of knowledge transfer and creativity has to be totally effortless. But I think when we sign in, so many of us are completely oblivious to what goes on behind the scenes to make this happen. Yeah.
And that's how it should be, right? That's what we talked about, the friction.
Perfect. We're doing our job, because that's exactly how it should be.
If that's the experience, then we're doing it right.
Yeah, that's right. And we're all, just striving to increase that engagement and to perfect that experience as technology changes daily, really. That you in the background are keeping up to date with all of that to make sure that the designer's experience is as fluid as possible, which is fabulous. So, gentlemen, thank you so much, and thank you so much for explaining all of this. We learn something new every single day.
Thank you so much, Debbie.
Neil, Frank, thank you very much.
Thanks, Debbie.